Hi there, I'm Jake. I live just outside of Tacoma, Washington, and I'm 24 years old. I'm not a big city guy, but it's close enough to keep me occupied. I am not just a tool-wielding guy feigning expertise. I am an electrician. In fact, I prepared for it, earned my certification, and was hired by a small local electrical company. We receive consistent work, but we're not a well-known company. I typically take on 2 or 3 service calls every day, which is sufficient to pay the bills, save some money, and maintain my goal of one day starting my own company. It was just another morning. I was scheduled for 2 jobs. The first was a simple, quick fix for a broken wall outlet in an office building. I then received a call from dispatch. Someone needed to check the lights in a woman's garage who lived just outside of the city. They seemed to short out at random. She wanted it finished today, but it wasn't an emergency. After getting the address, I entered it into my GPS and left. There were large homes, well-kept lawns, a peaceful neighborhood, and a slight detour from the main road. When I took a moment to slow down as I pulled up to the property, it was a contemporary 2-story house with a sleek black gate that had already been left open for me and a large driveway. I don't usually get called to fancy places. After parking, I picked up my toolbox and proceeded up the driveway in the direction of the garage. The door opened as I got closer to the side entrance, and a tall woman wearing plain jeans and a fitted t-shirt with long, dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail stepped out. She was probably in her 29s or 30s. However, it wasn't only how she looked. It was the way she carried herself, the way she looked, elegant and self-assured. She glanced down at her phone after giving me a quick look. Her voice was emotionless as she asked, "You're here for the garage lights?" "Yeah, Jake from Cascade Electric," was my response. She pointed to the garage and nodded, saying, "You said they've been flickering. They go out whenever I open the door. Sometimes they come back on, sometimes they don't. It's annoying." "Got it. I'll take a look." She didn't say much more, simply turned and walked through the door leading to the garage and back into the house. After putting my belongings down, I started working. The problem was quite simple. A motion sensor's outdated wiring was installed incorrectly. The last person to do it took shortcuts. The old unit was taken out, the wiring was cleaned, a proper motion sensor with new housing was installed, and the power was turned off. With testing included, it took roughly 2 hours, give or take. I didn't hear a word from her the entire time. She didn't check in or engage in small talk, just quiet. After finishing, I packed my tools, turned the breaker back on, and performed a few more light tests. Excellent. I waited after knocking on the door inside. She returned to the outside a few seconds later. She wasn't using her phone this time. She walked straight up, smiled slightly, and watched the lights turn on with a motion sensor. She uttered, "Well, finally. They function as intended." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "There was a wiring problem. I also changed the sensor just in case. Now she will be fine." She cocked her head slightly and crossed her arms. "You're good at what you do." "Thank you," I said with genuine gratitude. And then she said, "You're handsome. You know that." I blinked, not expecting it at all, and then I let out an awkward laugh. "Thanks." She smiled again, this time with a genuine smile that wasn't mocking or sarcastic, and then she leaned against the door frame. "So Jake, what else do you do besides fixing things?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "That's refreshing. I'm not really into the whole social scene either." That surprised me. She didn't look like someone who stayed home on weekends. Instead, she looked like someone you'd expect to see front row at a high-end lounge or on a cruise ship. I mean, sure, I've had some friendly customers before, but nothing like this. Not like her, honestly. "Not much," I said. "Work takes up most of my time. I don't really party or go out much." However, the way she said it sounded honest rather than like a line. I mean, she went on, "People assume certain things about you based on the way you look. I know this is random, but would you want to hang out this weekend? It gets exhausting." I nodded, not knowing what to say. She smiled and said, "Yeah, you me. Somewhere nice, somewhere quiet. You don't have to answer right now." I paused for a second before responding, "I'd like that." Her smile slightly widened. The rest of that day felt like a dream I wasn't quite awake for. As I drove to my next appointment, fixed a busted outlet at some guy's workshop, smiled through the usual small talk, and kept checking my phone. Little. Cool. I'll text you the details. Thanks again for the lights. And then she turned and walked back into the house, leaving me standing there like someone who just stepped out of a different reality. I got in my car, closed the door, and just sat there for a minute. What just happened? I didn't even know her name, and I had worked the entire job without asking, completely professional, until she dropped that comment at the end like a grenade. Would you want to hang out this weekend? I said yes, and then Friday came around and still nothing. I thought maybe she was just being polite, or maybe it was a rich person dare, something to laugh about later with her friends. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that people always say random things, but at noon on Friday, I got a message on my phone from an unknown number saying, "Hey, it's Claire from the lights. Still up for Saturday? I'll pick you up. Noon. Drop a pin." My stomach turned over, and I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until I let it out. So Claire. I had a name now, and she remembered. I didn't overthink it, so I sent her my location, a public parking lot outside a hardware store just off the main road. Not my place, not too far, just simple. She gave me the thumbs up. The following morning, I got ready way too early, trying on 3 similar shirts, cleaning my shoes, and even shaving. I never shave on the weekends, but for some reason, I felt like I had to be presentable. Still me, but cleaner. By the time I arrived at the parking lot, it wasn't even 11:45, so I sat on the curb and pretended to scroll through my phone while surreptitiously observing every car that pulled in. At 12:02, I heard it. She drove in a silver Porsche 911 Turbo. Top down, sunglasses on, and her hair was loose and blowing in the wind like a scene from a movie. I swear everyone in the lot stared at her and then at me, standing there like a delivery man waiting for a tip. She waved. "Jake." I nodded slightly and opened the passenger door. "That's me." She smiled. "Get in." The seats were buttery leather, the kind you only see in car ads. She smelled like citrus and something pricey I couldn't name. At last I said, "So, where are we going?" As we turned onto the highway. "When I need to decompress, I go to this place," she said. "Do you like it?" I swear, after about 40 minutes of driving through hills, forests, and narrower roads, she finally turned onto a gravel path that led to a wooded area. Before I could see anything, I heard rushing water. She parked, and after maybe 5 minutes of walking a short trail, it opened up, revealing a small waterfall that poured into a pool surrounded by trees and rocks. "This place," she said softly, "makes me feel small in a good way." We sat on one of the flat rocks, just far enough from the spray, and she took off her sandals and dipped her feet into the water, which was icy cold but refreshing. I followed her gaze, and she looked straight ahead and said, "I know what you're thinking. It was beautiful, quiet, and powerful, and it reached way up into the sky. Do you? You're probably wondering why someone like me would invite someone like you." I remained silent. She continued, "But growing up, everyone treated me like a label. Boys liked the idea of me. Girls either wanted to be me or hated me, and I never felt seen. Not really. Not until I met someone who didn't know my last name. My dad owns a logistics company. Big one. My mom runs the HR department. Our house was paid for in full before I turned 10. Cars, private schools, connections, all of it. I don't ask for anything complicated. You didn't try to impress me. You did your job. You said thank you, and you left. That's rare. You were just you." I didn't know how to respond to that. I thought maybe she was messing with me, like a joke. "I get that, but I wasn't." "I got that, but I wasn't. I don't ask for anything complicated. I just wanted to," I said. "No strings." She nodded. "Thanks." We sat there for perhaps an hour, talking, laughing a little, telling dumb stories. It was the most laid-back feeling I'd had in months. Eventually, the sun began to set, and she got up, wiping the gravel from her jeans. "Time to go." "Yeah," she said. "But I'm glad you came." The drive back was quiet, with only the wind and the road, and no music. She dropped me off exactly where she had picked me up. I opened the door and paused before turning to face her. "Will I see you again?" She didn't respond immediately, then said, "Maybe if you call me." I got out, shut the door, and watched her drive away. As soon as the car was gone, I realized that it wasn't a date. Not exactly. But it was more than a chance outing. It was the beginning of something, though I wasn't sure what yet. The days following our trip felt different, and I continued to do my routine tasks. Replacing panels, repairing sockets, resetting blown fuses. The strange thing is that she hadn't texted once. It wasn't like I expected a constant stream of messages or anything, but after how open and honest she was at the waterfall, after everything she told me, I guess I anticipated something. Hey, that was nice. Or even a meme, I don't know. But I wasn't going through the motions like I used to. Claire had taken up space in my mind, and not in a loud way. It was more like background music I couldn't turn off. The next Friday, I was sitting in my car outside a court, and I thought maybe she just needed someone to vent to. Maybe I'd been that one-day confidant. The poor but kind guy she could open up to because he didn't belong in her world. Maybe that was the whole point. But something, maybe the way she looked at me before I got out of the car, or the way she said, "Maybe if you call me," like she was giving me the ball and walking off the court, stopped me from moving on. I took out my phone, tapped her name, and she answered on the third ring. "Hey," I said. "It's Jake." Her voice was warm and familiar, and I could hear a smile in her tone. "I was hoping you'd call," she said. I let out a slow breath, surprised at how much tension I'd been holding in. "Would you want to meet again?" I asked. "This time, I'll plan something." There was a pause, and then, "I'd like that." We settled on Sunday afternoon, and I told her I would pick her up. I had no idea what someone like Claire would expect from a second meeting, but I knew what I wanted it to be: real. Not a restaurant, not a showy place, just something simple. So I planned a picnic. Yes, a real one. Borrowing a blanket from my mom, packing sandwiches, fruit, and a couple of glass bottles of lemonade. I even purchased a small cooler for the occasion. On Sunday afternoon, I pulled up in front of her house. That same huge place with the wide driveway and the modern glass windows. She was already outside, standing on the front steps, wearing a soft blue hoodie and black leggings. No makeup, no sunglasses, no Porsche. She smiled as she slid into the passenger seat. "Hey, picnic boy," I laughed. "Always ready for a surprise." "I don't remember the last time I did something like this," she said. "What, a picnic?" "No. Something that wasn't curated, controlled, Instagrammable. This feels honest." We parked under some trees, carried everything out, and spread the blanket on the grass. It had a view of the hills, the sky stretched wide above, and the kind of stillness that makes you realize how loud your life usually is. Then there was a moment when she was silent, staring off into the trees. The sun hit her face just right, and she turned to me slowly, saying, "You know what I liked most about the other day?" She was eating, laughing at how bad I was at peeling oranges, talking about random things, childhood stories, strange clients, favorite songs. It just flowed. "What?" I asked. "You didn't give me the impression that you needed anything from me. Not cash, not fame, not even approval. You simply..." I swallowed hard, not sure how to react. Then she leaned forward slightly, and I met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, not hurried, not dramatic, and it felt like a silent confirmation that we both agreed on something without exchanging words. She smiled gently as we withdrew, and I said, "I was hoping you'd do that. I wasn't sure I could. You're kind of intimidating." She laughed. "I know. I do that on purpose. Keeps the wrong people away." We lay on the blanket for another hour, watching the sky. She reached out and took my hand as the sun began to set. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly, "but I like it." Me too. We didn't say much on the drive back, but it wasn't because we didn't have anything to say. It was because we didn't need to. She didn't ask to be dropped at the gate. She just pulled up to the front door. "Text me," she said. "Anytime." Then she was gone, and I sat there for a minute before the car drove away, the smell of lemon and lavender still lingering in the air. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew that this was no longer a one-time thing. The following days felt light, not because of anything significant that had happened, but just because your chest didn't feel tight when you woke up. Your work didn't drag, and going from job to job felt less like a grind and more like motion with a purpose. I began texting Claire. Nothing fancy, just plain, everyday things. I just fixed a ceiling fan. She was rich, beautiful, and self-assured, and I was just me, a regular guy in work boots with permanently stained hands. During a Zoom call with 12 people, She spilled coffee on a silk blouse. We laughed, shared songs, and sent each other pictures of clouds that we thought looked like objects. It was like we were creating something without trying to define it. I was me, a regular guy in work boots with permanently stained hands. Not proud, just saying. Heroic. Me. Your move. She texted me late on a Thursday, a week after the picnic, saying, Claire, are you free tomorrow evening? Me. Technically always free, emotionally unclarable, and professionally underpaid. Why? Come over, Jake. My parents are out of town for a week. I want to show you something. It was the first time she invited me into her space. Really into it. Not just a garage. Not the front steps. I hesitated for a second, but then I said, I'll be there. The front door was open. The sun was low, creating a golden line across her driveway. She was barefoot in the hallway, wearing an oversized knit sweater and leggings, her hair tied up in a messy bun, and she had no makeup on. She said, Hey, stepping aside. Come in. I entered the foyer, and the house looked stunning, like it belonged in a design magazine, with high ceilings, glass walls, and modern accents. But nothing felt cold. We ate on the patio under hanging lights. The air was cool, and she handed me a hoodie that she said was probably an ex's. I didn't ask questions, and the conversation flowed. She then led me through the house and into the kitchen, where 2 plates were set on the island with candles already lit. You cooked? I asked, surprised. Technically, yes, she said, because I ordered from a place I like and reheated it. She got up and said, Come on, I want to show you something. I told her about my dream of starting my own small repair business that trained young men who, like me, didn't want to attend college. She then led me upstairs to her room at the end of the hall and opened the door to reveal a tiny art studio, with canvases leaning against the wall, some unfinished, some covered, and some full of color and expression I never would have imagined. You paint? I asked, stunned. She nodded. Not for anyone, just for me. I entered slowly, scanning my surroundings. This is the only place where I feel like myself, she said, standing behind me. You should feel like yourself all the time. I turned to her. No makeup, no expectations, no pressure. She glanced at me, and her confidence briefly faltered before she moved closer. I don't know what this is between us, Jake, she said quietly, but I know I'm not pretending when I'm with you. That matters to me. I don't know what this is either, I said, but I think about you all the time. We stood in that room, surrounded by color and silence. She put her head on my shoulder and whispered, You're the first person I've let in like this in a long time. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. Later that night, we sat on her couch with our legs tangled and an old movie playing in the background. I kissed her again, but this time it felt different. There was no hesitation, no question mark in the air. It felt like something we both knew we wanted, something we were gradually letting ourselves trust. We both fell asleep on the couch at one point. When I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of gentle rain tapping the windows, she was still there, sleeping, her hand resting on my chest as if it were supposed to be there. I didn't want to move. I didn't want the moment to end. I didn't know what would happen next, whether the gap between our lives would grow too great, whether her world would swallow mine. But I knew this. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I felt seen. It's been about 4 months since I knocked on Claire's garage door for the first time, and I can still clearly recall it. The way she didn't even look at me when she let me in, the cold clipped tone in her voice, the way she pointed to the broken lights as if I were just another name on a service invoice. And for a few hours I was. However, something else sparked in the middle of bad wiring and stripped wires, and we continued to see each other after that. Sunday evenings became entire weekends. Texts became phone calls. Awkward silences became comfortable ones. And there was no dramatic turning point. No, will you be mine? But it was gradual, honest, and I believe that's what made it so real. But reality has layers, and I soon discovered that dating someone like Claire came with them. We both had lives, routines, jobs, not every day together, but enough that it started to feel normal. Or rather, appropriate. One time, at a dinner party for her friend's engagement, everyone was dressed in cocktail dresses and tailored suits, discussing equity shares and launch valuations. I was driving, so I sipped ginger ale, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to look like I was counting down the minutes. Later, you walk into a restaurant and people recognize her, not from TV or anything, but just because she's someone. Because I was part of that world now. Sort of. When I told her that night that I didn't fit in, she simply looked at me and said, "That's because you're not like them. And that's exactly why I brought you." That meant a lot. But it didn't make things simpler. Her world wasn't the only one adapting. So was mine. My supervisor saw that I was preoccupied. Not because I was lazy, but because I began to care more about being somewhere than doing something. I began to decline more calls, and that was novel for a man who had always defined himself by his work. Claire took note. One evening, we were in my apartment, tiny, messy, and cozy in that lived-in sense. She was sitting cross-legged on my couch, flipping through one of my old high school yearbooks, which I had no idea I still had. "You built a good life here," I told her honestly. "It's not much," she said, "but it's mine." She looked around at the tools stacked by the door, the cracked countertop, and the one thrift store painting hanging by a tilting nail. "I like it," she said, and I believed her. That evening, we spent hours talking about our lives, our futures, our places. I told her I was thinking about finally registering my own business, getting a van, branding myself, not just working for someone else, but building something I could call mine. She told me she was thinking about leaving her corporate job. She was tired of acting like she cared about metrics she didn't believe in. She had been considering starting something smaller, more meaningful, maybe even something creative. I looked at her and said, "Like us." She nodded. "Yeah, like us." 2 months have passed since then, and she's been helping me create a small brand, logo, website, even a basic marketing plan. I'm still working the jobs, climbing ladders, getting paint on my boots, but now it feels like I'm not just patching things up. I'm moving forward. We're not hurrying anything. We still live in our own places, still have our own mornings, our own bad habits. But we're choosing each other purposefully every day, and that choice means more than any label. We returned to the waterfall last weekend, the same location, the same rocks, but this time we brought coffee and donuts. I put my arm around her, and she leaned her head on my shoulder while we listened to the water for a while. She said, "I never thought I'd fall for the guy fixing my lights." I laughed. "I never imagined the girl who owned that house would invite me back." "Well, you're more than just the guy who fixed my lights." And I was more than that. I'm still Jake, still 24 years old, still figuring things out, one job, one bill, one step at a time. But now I have someone who sees me, not for what I can do, but for who I am. Perhaps that's the true story here. Not the rich girl meets the working class guy. Not the Porsche. Not the picnic. Not the kiss. But two people from different lives choosing to build something fresh together. Real, messy, flawed, and genuine. Without drama or explosion.